He told me to talk to his deaf son as a joke, like it was some game to embarrass me in front of the whole restaurant. The silence I returned wasn't empty. It was louder than any insult they hurled my way. Maybe you're serving tables for people who don't appreciate it, or cleaning up after everyone else has left. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise today's story will touch your heart. My name is Eleanor, and I've been carrying trays longer than I care to remember. The sharp scent of burnt espresso and the clatter of silverware on porcelain have become the soundtrack of my existence. Every morning at 4:30, I wrap my graying hair into a tight bun, slip into my starched white uniform, and face another day at Le Bernardin's upscale sister restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. My reflection in the staff bathroom mirror shows a woman whose eyes have learned to hide behind professional smiles. The crow's feet around them tell stories of countless double shifts, of bills paid just in time, of dreams deferred but never quite abandoned. My hands are my story, calloused from years of gripping hot plates, scarred from minor burns that come with the territory, but still steady, still capable. Still willing to serve with dignity, even when dignity isn't returned. The wedding ring I once wore left a pale indent that's faded now, like so many other things in my life that once promised permanence. My daughter Sarah is 22, studying pre-med at Columbia, and every cent I earn goes toward her future. Every insult I swallow, every ache I ignore, every moment of humiliation I endure, it's all for her. The restaurant where I work caters to Manhattan's elite. Wall Street moguls sip $30 glasses of wine while discussing their stock portfolios. Real estate magnates negotiate million-dollar deals over $100 steaks. I've learned to recognize the different types of wealth that flow through these dining rooms like invisible rivers. There's old money, quiet, refined, polite, but distant. Then there's new money. Loud, flashy, desperate to be noticed and acknowledged. The cryptocurrency millionaires who made their fortunes in Bitcoin flash their success like peacock feathers. The investment bankers whose net worth fluctuates with market dividends treat the restaurant like their personal boardroom. My manager, David, is a thin man with nervous energy who treats customer satisfaction like a religion. He hovers near the kitchen doors, watching us servers with hawk-like intensity, ready to pounce on any mistake that might tarnish the restaurant's sterling reputation. His salary depends on keeping the wealthy clientele happy, and he's made it clear that we're easily replaceable. The staff turnover rate speaks volumes about the pressure we're under. Good servers leave for gentler environments. The rest of us stay because we need the tips that come with serving the financial elite. The dining room itself is a temple to luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white tablecloths. The walls are adorned with expensive artwork that probably costs more than I'll make in 5 years. Persian rugs muffle the footsteps of patrons who casually discuss their investment portfolios between courses. The wine list reads like a catalog of liquid assets, with bottles that cost more than my monthly rent. This is where Manhattan's millionaires and billionaires come to see and be seen, to conduct business deals worth more money than I can comprehend. But beneath the glittering surface, I've learned to read the subtle signs of this world, the way a businessman's demeanor changes when his stock options tank, the tension that ripples through a table when a real estate deal falls through, the casual cruelty that emerges when people feel their status threatened. I've become invisible furniture in their world, present but unnoticed, hearing conversations about fortunes won and lost while I refill water glasses and clear plates. My days start before dawn on the subway platform in Queens, waiting for the train that will carry me into Manhattan's gleaming heart. The morning commute is filled with workers like me, housekeepers heading to penthouses, doormen reporting to luxury buildings, nannies caring for children whose trust funds exceed my lifetime earnings. We're the invisible army that keeps the city's elite comfortable, and we understand each other without words. The exhaustion in our eyes, the careful way we preserve our uniforms, the quiet determination that gets us through each day. At home, in my one-bedroom apartment, Sarah's acceptance letter to medical school hangs framed on the kitchen wall. It's my North Star, the reason I smile at customers who snap their fingers for my attention, the reason I swallow pride daily like bitter medicine. The apartment is small but clean, filled with secondhand furniture and the smell of whatever I can manage to cook after a 14-hour shift. The refrigerator hums with the promise of leftovers, and the walls are thin enough that I can hear my neighbors' televisions through the plaster. Sarah visits when she can, usually bringing textbooks and the exhausted but hopeful expression of someone chasing a dream we both know is worth the sacrifice. She doesn't complain about the cramped quarters or the fact that I'm rarely home before midnight. She understands that every plate I carry, every table I serve, every slight I endure is paving the way for her future. Sometimes I catch her looking at my hands, how they've aged, how they shake slightly after long shifts, and I see guilt flicker across her face. But I always reassure her. This is what mothers do. This is love made tangible through sacrifice. The restaurant's rhythm becomes your heartbeat when you've worked there long enough. The lunch rush that starts at 11:30 and doesn't slow until 2. The brief lull when we grab whatever food we can, standing in the kitchen's heat because there's no time to sit. Then the dinner service that stretches until well past 10, when the last patron finally leaves and we begin the long process of closing. My feet know every tile of that floor, every shortcut between tables, every blind spot where I can catch my breath for 30 seconds. The other servers have become my chosen family. Maria, who's been here longer than anyone, has taught me which customers tip well and which ones to avoid if possible. James, barely out of college, still believes he's going to become an actor and treats waiting tables as a temporary inconvenience. Linda, whose husband left her with 3 kids, works with the same desperate determination that drives me. We share knowing looks across crowded dining rooms, offer silent support during particularly difficult shifts, and cover for each other when exhaustion threatens to break us. But it was the wealthy customers who really shaped my understanding of power and powerlessness, the way they looked through me rather than at me, as if I were part of the restaurant's fixtures. The casual condescension in their voices when they made special requests or complained about perceived slights. The assumption that because I served them food, I was somehow less human, less deserving of basic respect. I learned to armor myself with professional courtesy, to perfect a smile that revealed nothing of the woman beneath the uniform. Some interactions still burn in my memory years later. The oil executive who berated me for 5 minutes because his medium-rare steak was slightly closer to medium. The pharmaceutical heiress who accused me of theft when she couldn't find her diamond earring, which later turned up in her purse. The tech entrepreneur who loudly discussed his company's latest IPO while treating me like an automaton, programmed to refill his coffee cup. These moments accumulated like stone in my chest, each one a small wound that never quite healed. Yet I also witnessed unexpected humanity in unlikely places. The elderly billionaire who always asked about my daughter and left generous tips with handwritten notes of encouragement. The investment banker's wife who quietly paid my medical bills when I mentioned needing dental work I couldn't afford. The cryptocurrency mogul who noticed when I was limping and insisted on calling me a cab home, prepaying the fare. These moments of kindness were rare but precious, reminders that wealth doesn't automatically eliminate compassion, though it often makes compassion optional rather than necessary. The particular evening that changed everything started like any other. October rain drummed against the restaurant's windows, casting the dining room in a cozy golden glow that made the wealthy patrons look like characters in an expensive painting. The dinner rush was in full swing, every table occupied by Manhattan's financial elite discussing their latest investments over wine that cost more than most people's weekly salary. The air buzzed with conversations about market fluctuations, cryptocurrency portfolios, and real estate acquisitions that involved sums I could barely comprehend. I was carrying a tray of appetizers when I first noticed them at table 12. A family of 4, clearly wealthy based on the woman's designer dress and the man's custom-tailored suit. The father commanded attention even while seated, his voice carrying across the dining room as he discussed his latest business triumph. Something about a merger that would increase his company's net worth by several $1,000,000. His confidence filled the space around their table like cologne, expensive and overwhelming. But it was the teenage boy who caught my eye first, 16 or 17, with gentle features and an alertness that seemed to take in everything around him. While his parents and younger sister chatted animatedly, he sat quietly, his hands moving in what I recognized immediately as American Sign Language. He was talking to himself, or perhaps practicing something, his fingers forming careful shapes in the air near his lap where others wouldn't notice. I felt that familiar flutter of recognition. You see, my daughter Sarah had been born with a profound hearing loss that corrected itself through surgery when she was 12. But those early years had necessitated my learning ASL. I'd become fluent out of love and necessity, spending countless hours practicing so I could communicate fully with my child. Even after her hearing returned, we continued using sign language as our special connection, our secret way of talking across crowded rooms without anyone else understanding. The family's wealth was evident in every detail. The mother's handbag probably cost more than my annual salary. The father's watch gleamed with the kind of understated luxury that screamed serious money, likely worth more than my apartment's yearly rent. They ordered without looking at prices, the kind of casual spending that comes from portfolios diversified across stocks, bonds, and probably Bitcoin investments that generated more passive income than I made working 14-hour days. As I approached their table with menus, I caught fragments of their conversation. The father was explaining to his business partner, who joined them for dinner, about his latest investment strategy. Something about moving assets into cryptocurrency markets, diversifying his fortune across international markets, interest rates, and dividend yields that apparently promised exceptional returns. His wife nodded along, occasionally interjecting with comments about their upcoming vacation to Europe, funded by what she casually mentioned was just some quarterly profits from our tech stocks. But the boy remained apart from their world of financial success, his hands still moving in silent conversation with himself. I wondered if his family even noticed his isolation, if they understood that while they discussed millions in assets, their son was practicing basic communication in a language they likely couldn't understand. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was tremendous wealth surrounding a child who was essentially living in poverty of connection. When I reached their table to take their order, the father barely glanced at me. His attention remained focused on his business partner as they discussed market projections and investment opportunities. The mother smiled perfunctorily, the kind of expression wealthy people perfect for dealing with service staff, pleasant but dismissive, acknowledging my existence without actually seeing me as human. Their daughter, maybe 14, was absorbed in her phone, probably checking her social media accounts or shopping for luxury items online. Only the boy looked directly at me, and in his eyes I saw something familiar. The slight tension around them suggested awareness of being different, misunderstood. The way his shoulders held themselves spoke of someone accustomed to being overlooked or misinterpreted. I recognized that protective positioning because I wore it myself, the invisible armor of people who serve others while remaining unseen. As I went through the motions of describing specials and taking drink orders, I noticed the boy's growing agitation. His parents were speaking louder now, their business conversation becoming more animated as they discussed a particularly lucrative real estate deal. The restaurant's ambient noise, clinking glasses, multiple conversations, background music, clearly made it difficult for him to follow along with any lip reading he might be attempting. The father's voice rose with enthusiasm as he described his latest triumph, buying distressed properties and converting them into luxury condominiums, generating returns that had significantly boosted his net worth. The profit margins are incredible, he told his business partner, gesturing expansively with his wine glass. We're talking about assets that appreciate faster than most stock portfolios. My financial advisor says this type of investment diversification is exactly what wealthy families need to maintain their fortune across generations. But while the adults celebrated financial success, the boy seemed increasingly isolated. His hands moved more frantically, and I realized he was becoming overwhelmed by his inability to participate in or even fully understand the conversation swirling around him. This was clearly a recurring theme in his family life: being present but not included, surrounded by people who shared everything except the language he needed to truly connect. That's when the father noticed my attention to his son and misinterpreted it completely. Perhaps seeing an opportunity to entertain his business partner, or maybe just cruel amusement at finding an audience for his humor, he decided to turn his son's difference into a spectacle. The casual cruelty of people who've never questioned their power over others was about to reveal itself in ways that would change everything. "Hey, waitress!" the father called out, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use with service staff, not quite rude, but clearly establishing hierarchy. "You seem interested in my son. Why don't you talk to him?" His business partner looked up expectantly, and I sensed this was about to become entertainment rather than genuine interaction. The father's smile had edges to it, the kind that suggested he was setting up some kind of performance. "Go ahead," he continued, his voice louder now, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Talk to him. See if you can get him to respond." The way he said it made my skin crawl. There was mockery beneath his words, an assumption that I would fail spectacularly and provide amusing confirmation of his son's limitations. His business partner chuckled, clearly understanding this was meant to be some kind of joke at both his son's expense and mine. The restaurant seemed to pause around us. Other diners turned slightly, sensing drama unfolding. The boy's face flushed with embarrassment and his hands stilled completely. He knew what his father was doing, knew he was about to become the punchline of someone else's humor. The mother continued smiling that empty smile, neither stopping her husband nor protecting her son. She seemed accustomed to these moments, complicit in her silence. My heart broke for this child. Surrounded by wealth, but impoverished in the ways that truly mattered. His family had millions in assets, probably trust funds and investment portfolios that guaranteed his financial security for life, but they couldn't give him the simple dignity of respectful communication. In that moment, he wasn't their beloved son. He was their entertainment, their way of asserting superiority over a waitress who dared to show interest in someone they saw as less than perfect. The silence stretched as everyone waited for my reaction. The father's business partner had his phone out, probably ready to record whatever comedic failure was about to unfold. Other wealthy patrons leaned in slightly, eager for the show. This was the kind of moment that reinforced their world's hierarchy, the rich having fun at the expense of those who served them, reducing both me and this vulnerable boy to objects for their amusement. But something rose in me that surprised us both. Instead of the humiliation they expected, instead of the stammering confusion they anticipated, I looked directly at the boy and moved my hands with fluid grace. "Hello," I signed, my fingers forming the familiar shapes with practiced ease. "My name is Eleanor. It's lovely to meet you." The boy's eyes widened with shock, then filled with something precious. Hope, recognition, connection. The adults' laughter died in their throats as they realized their joke had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating me, they'd revealed their own ignorance and cruelty. The boy's hands flew in response, signing back with desperate enthusiasm. "You can talk to me, really talk to me. How do you know my language?" His face was transformed, no longer withdrawn and isolated, but alive with the joy of finally being understood by someone in this restaurant full of people who'd never bothered to learn how to communicate with him. "I learned because my daughter needed me to," I signed back, maintaining eye contact with him while acutely aware of the stunned silence around our table. Everyone deserves to be heard and understood. The simple truth of that statement seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet dining room. The father's face had gone from smug anticipation to confused anger. His joke had not only failed, it had revealed him as the ignorant one, the person who couldn't communicate with his own son. His business partner lowered his phone, clearly recognizing that this moment had shifted from comedy to something far more powerful and uncomfortable. The other diners looked away, suddenly aware they'd been expecting entertainment from someone else's pain. The boy continued signing rapidly, telling me about school, about feeling lonely even when surrounded by people, about how rare it was to meet someone who could understand him without struggle. His hands moved with increasing excitement as he realized he had a genuine conversation partner, someone who saw him as complete rather than lacking. "What are you doing?" the father demanded, his voice sharp with the kind of anger that comes from losing control of a situation. "What's all that hand-waving about?" The fact that he couldn't even identify his son's communication method as a legitimate language spoke volumes about their family dynamic. I turned to him with calm dignity, my voice steady and clear. "I'm having a conversation with your son, sir, in American Sign Language. He's been telling me about his day, about school, about things that matter to him." Each word was carefully measured, professional, but with underlying steel. "He's a remarkable young man with a lot to say." The mother finally spoke, her voice nervous. You know sign language? Really?" There was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't the first time their family had encountered their ignorance about their son's needs, but it might be the first time someone had highlighted it so publicly. "Yes, ma'am. I learned it from my daughter when she was young." I kept my response simple, focusing back on the boy whose face was radiant with the simple joy of being understood. He was signing more slowly now, asking me questions about my life, my family, treating me with the kind of genuine interest his wealthy parents rarely showed anyone, especially service staff. The business partner cleared his throat uncomfortably. The entertainment he'd expected had transformed into a lesson in human dignity that nobody at the table seemed prepared for. Nearby diners were murmuring among themselves, their earlier anticipation of someone else's humiliation replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of their own assumptions. But the boy was oblivious to the adult's discomfort. For the first time in what was probably weeks or months, he had someone's complete attention, someone who could understand not just his words, but the loneliness behind them. He told me about his art, about books he loved, about dreams of traveling to places where signing was more common and accepted. His world expanded before my eyes as he finally had the chance to share it. "This is ridiculous," the father muttered, but his voice lacked the confident bluster he'd started with. He was clearly trapped between his initial cruel setup and the reality that his joke had revealed more about his own failures than anyone else's limitations. His business partner was checking his phone, probably looking for an escape from the increasingly awkward situation. The boy signed something that made my heart ache. "My father doesn't understand me. He thinks I'm broken. He makes jokes sometimes, but they hurt." The honesty in his gestures, the pain behind his carefully controlled expression, revealed a family dynamic built on wealth but impoverished in love and understanding. I signed back carefully, aware that others were watching, even if they couldn't understand. "You're not broken. You're whole and perfect exactly as you are. Your language is beautiful and you have so much to offer the world." The transformation in his posture was immediate. His shoulders straightened, his face brightened, and for the first time since I'd approached their table, he looked genuinely happy. The simple act of being seen, understood, and validated had given him something his family's fortune couldn't purchase: genuine human connection and respect. The father's anger was building, fueled by embarrassment and his loss of control over the situation. His face was reddening, and I could see him preparing to reassert his authority through volume and aggression. His business partner was shifting uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could disappear from this increasingly tense scene. But before the father could explode, something happened that changed everything. As the boy reached eagerly for his water glass, his sleeve pulled back, revealing something that made my breath catch. Along his thin forearm were the telltale marks of an IV site, still bruised and tender. The pale, almost translucent quality of his skin, the slight tremor in his hands that I'd initially attributed to excitement, the way he tired quickly during our conversation. Suddenly, everything clicked into focus. This wasn't just a deaf teenager. This was a sick child, someone fighting a battle that made his family's cruelty even more heartbreaking. The evidence of recent medical treatment, probably chemotherapy based on what I could see, explained his fragility and the desperate way he'd grabbed onto our connection. He wasn't just isolated by his deafness. He was probably spending significant time in hospitals, fighting for health, while his family focused on business deals and investment portfolios. My heart broke completely. Here was a child facing challenges that would break most adults, and his father had just used him as entertainment, a punchline to amuse a business partner. The casual cruelty was breathtaking in its complete lack of awareness or compassion. Without thinking, I signed to him. "You're very brave, braver than anyone in this room." His eyes filled with grateful tears, and he signed back, "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me." The father finally erupted, "Enough! I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we didn't come here for some circus act. Just take our order and leave us alone." His voice carried across the restaurant, and other diners turned to stare openly now, but his son looked directly at him and began signing with deliberate, careful movements. Even without understanding the language, it was clear the boy was standing up for himself, probably for the first time. His gestures had the weight of accumulated frustration and pain, months or years of being treated as less than complete. The father stared at his son's moving hands with confused anger. "Stop that nonsense! Use your words!" The boy's response was to sign more emphatically, his movements precise and beautiful. I could see him telling his father exactly what he thought of being used as entertainment, of being treated like a joke rather than a person worthy of dignity and respect. The mother finally spoke up, her voice shaking. "Charles, please, people are watching." But her concern was clearly about their public image rather than their son's feelings. The business partner had gone silent, recognizing that this family dinner had become a revelation of character that was deeply uncomfortable to witness. I found my voice again, speaking directly to the father with quiet firmness. "Sir, your son is trying to communicate with you. He has something important to say if you're willing to listen." "I don't pay you to interpret my family's drama," he snapped back, but his bluster was weakening. The other diner's continued attention was making him aware that his behavior was being judged, and the judgment wasn't favorable. The boy suddenly stopped signing and reached for the small notebook he'd been carrying. With shaking hands, and I noticed again how thin and fragile those hands were, he wrote something and pushed the paper toward his father. The restaurant had gone quiet enough that I could hear the scratch of his pen against paper. His father glanced at the note and his face went completely white. Whatever his son had written, it had cut through his anger and hit something vulnerable. The business partner leaned slightly to see, then immediately looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the private family moment unfolding so publicly. The boy wrote something else and showed it to me. In careful script, it read, "Thank you for treating me like I'm worth talking to. Most people don't." My eyes filled with tears I couldn't hide. This child, fighting battles I could only imagine, had been grateful for simple human respect that should have been his birthright. The contrast between his family's financial wealth and their emotional poverty was starkly clear. I signed back to him, "You are worth so much more than you know. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The father's voice, when he finally spoke again, was much quieter. I think we should order." But the fight had gone out of him. Whatever his son had written had shaken something loose in his understanding of their dynamic. The rest of the dinner passed in subdued tones. I took their orders professionally, checking on them periodically. But the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The boy ate carefully, and I noticed he tired quickly, confirming my suspicions about his health. His parents spoke in hushed voices, their earlier business celebration forgotten completely. As they prepared to leave, the boy signed to me one final time. "Will you remember me?" "Always," I signed back. "You matter. Your voice matters. Don't ever forget that." The father left a tip that was larger than usual, but it felt more like guilt money than generosity. As they walked out, I watched the boy struggle slightly with fatigue, and my heart ached for everything he was facing with so little family support. I thought that would be the end of it, one meaningful encounter in a lifetime of service, a reminder that sometimes we can touch someone's life even in brief moments. I went home that night feeling like I'd done something right, like for once my presence had mattered to someone who desperately needed to be seen. But I was wrong. That evening was just the beginning of something much more complicated and ultimately life-changing. Because in a world where wealth often provides shield from consequences, my moment of human decency was about to be twisted into something ugly, and the price I'd pay would teach me hard lessons about power, justice, and the cost of standing up for what's right. The next morning started like every other morning. My alarm screamed at 4:30, pulling me from dreams into the gray reality of another day. The shower water was lukewarm at best. Our building's ancient plumbing couldn't handle peak usage times, but it was enough to wash away the cobwebs and prepare me for another 14-hour shift. Sarah had left a note on the kitchen counter before heading to her early chemistry lab. "Last night sounded different when you came home. You seemed lighter somehow. Love you, Mom." She was right. Something had shifted inside me after meeting that boy, after using sign language in that context for the first time in years. I'd forgotten how powerful communication could be, how much it meant to bridge the gap between isolation and connection. The memory of his grateful tears followed me onto the subway, through the morning rush hour crush of bodies and dreams, heading into Manhattan's gleaming heart. The restaurant opened for lunch service as usual. David, our manager, was his typical nervous self, hovering and micromanaging as the first customers trickled in. The lunch crowd was different from dinner. More business meetings, quicker transactions, less time for the kind of meaningful interaction I'd had the evening before. I served financial advisors discussing their clients' portfolios, real estate developers planning luxury developments, tech entrepreneurs whose cryptocurrency investments had made them wealthy beyond imagination. But around 2:30, just as the lunch rush was winding down, David approached me with an expression I'd never seen before. His usually nervous demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more decisive, and infinitely more troubling. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying the kind of false formality that meant serious trouble, "I need to see you in my office. Now." The walk to his cramped office behind the kitchen felt longer than usual. Other staff members avoided eye contact, which sent ice through my veins. In 15 years of working there, I'd never been called to a formal meeting. My performance reviews were always positive, my customer feedback consistently good, my attendance nearly perfect despite single motherhood challenges. David closed the door and sat behind his desk, which was cluttered with invoices, schedules, and the constant paperwork that kept our upscale establishment running. He wouldn't meet my eyes, which told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would go. "I received a complaint," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "A serious complaint about your behavior last night." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complaint?" "The family at table 12. The gentleman called this morning, very upset about your conduct during their dinner." David finally looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that might have been apology or might have been resignation. He said you were inappropriate with his son, that you made them uncomfortable, that you overstepped professional boundaries. The words hit me like physical blows. Inappropriate? David, I had a conversation with their son in sign language. He was deaf, and his father was... I stopped myself before saying something that would make this worse. He said you were invasive, that you inserted yourself into their private family business without permission. He said you made his son upset and created a scene that embarrassed them in front of other diners. David's recitation sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced these words to get through the conversation without showing his own discomfort. That's not what happened. My voice was steady, but inside I was reeling. Their son was isolated, unable to participate in the family conversation, when his father told me to talk to him as a joke, David, as entertainment. I treated the boy with respect and dignity. I communicated with him in his own language. The customer says you were rude and unprofessional. He's threatened to post negative reviews, contact the corporate office, take his considerable business elsewhere. David's emphasis on considerable business told me exactly what this was about. Money. Always money. So you're taking his word over mine, after 15 years of working here. The betrayal was sharp and immediate. David, you know me. You know I would never be inappropriate with a customer, especially not a child. Eleanor. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking older than his 40-something years. This gentleman, his family spends significant money here. They're part of a social circle that represents a substantial portion of our revenue. I can't afford to lose customers like that. There it was, the truth laid bare. 15 years of loyal service, thousands of shifts worked, countless satisfied customers, countless times I'd gone above and beyond. None of it mattered when weighed against one wealthy family's version of events. So what happens now? I asked, though I already knew. I'm going to have to let you go. Effective immediately. The words came out in a rush, like he wanted to get them over with as quickly as possible. I'll give you 2 weeks severance pay, and I'll provide a neutral reference if asked, but I can't risk the negative publicity this could generate. The room seemed to tilt around me. 15 years of my life, gone because I'd shown kindness to a suffering child. I thought about Sarah's medical school tuition, about our small apartment, about the careful budget that required every penny I earned to keep us afloat. David, please. You know this isn't fair. You know I would never... I'm sorry, Eleanor, I really am, but the decision's already made. He handed me an envelope, probably containing my final pay and paperwork. You can clean out your locker, but I need you to leave quietly. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. Just like the boy's father had made a scene by using his disabled son as entertainment. But somehow my crime was treating that same boy with human dignity. The injustice was breathtaking in its completeness. I walked to my locker in a daze. Maria was there, changing into her street clothes after the lunch shift, and one look at my face told her everything. Eleanor, what happened? Her voice was gentle, concerned, the way people speak when they already suspect bad news. I've been fired. The words felt strange in my mouth, unreal. The family from last night filed a complaint. Maria's face went through several changes: confusion, anger, resignation. She'd worked in restaurants long enough to understand the power dynamic at play. The deaf boy's family? But you were so kind to him. I watched you signing with him. It was beautiful. Apparently kindness isn't what they wanted. I packed my few belongings, a spare uniform, some personal items I'd accumulated over the years, a photo of Sarah from her high school graduation. Everything that defined my working life fit into a small paper bag. This is wrong, Maria said fiercely. Everyone saw what really happened. The father was being cruel, and you showed that boy respect. How can they fire you for that? But we both knew how. Wealth provides armor against consequences, while people like us are easily disposable. The family's version of events would become the official truth, and my 15 years of service would be erased by their social and financial power. As I walked out of the restaurant for the last time, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished windows. I looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of injustice and uncertainty. The uniform I'd worn with pride for so many years felt like a costume now, a reminder of how little protection loyalty and hard work actually provided. The subway ride home was a blur of fluorescent lights and strangers' faces. I clutched the envelope containing my final pay, doing rapid mental calculations. 2 weeks of severance would barely cover rent, let alone Sarah's expenses. The job market for servers my age was competitive, and without a reference I could fully trust, finding new employment would be challenging. At home, I sat at my small kitchen table and stared at the envelope. Inside was my final paycheck, a brief termination letter citing customer complaints and professional misconduct, and a form about continuing health insurance that I couldn't afford anyway. 15 years reduced to paperwork and bureaucratic language that made my firing sound justified and reasonable. Sarah came home to find me still sitting there, still staring at papers that represented the collapse of our carefully maintained stability. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Mom, what's wrong?" She dropped her backpack and knelt beside my chair, her young face already reflecting the worry I'd tried so hard to protect her from. "I lost my job today." The words came out flat, emotionless. Shock had numbed me beyond tears or anger. A customer complained about me and David fired me. "Complained about what? You're the best server there. Everyone says so." Sarah's indignation was fierce and immediate, protective of her mother in a way that broke my heart. I told her about the deaf boy, about his family's cruelty, about how I'd tried to show him kindness and somehow become the villain in their story. Sarah listened with growing anger, her hands clenching into fists as she understood the injustice of it all. "That's completely wrong. You were helping that boy. How can they fire you for being kind?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear beneath her outrage. At 22, she understood better than I'd hoped what my job loss meant for both our futures. Because they have money and power, and we don't. The simple truth of it was brutal, but inescapable. Because customer complaints from wealthy families matter more than employees who can't fight back. We sat in silence for a long moment, both of us processing the new reality. Sarah's medical school dreams suddenly felt more precarious. My own sense of identity, so tied to being a provider and protector, had been shattered in a single morning. "We'll figure this out," Sarah said finally, her voice stronger than her years should have allowed. "I can take out more student loans, get a job, help with expenses. We're not giving up." But I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I was feeling. We'd been walking a financial tightrope for years, and I'd just been pushed off without a safety net. The wealthy family at table 12 would probably never think about us again, but their moment of cruel entertainment had potentially destroyed our carefully built life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events at the restaurant, searching for some moment where I could have acted differently, some way I could have helped that boy without sacrificing our security. But every time I reached the same conclusion, I couldn't have walked away from his pain, couldn't have left him isolated and hurt just to protect myself. I thought about his grateful tears, the way his face had lit up when someone finally saw him as complete rather than lacking. Even knowing the cost, I couldn't regret giving him that moment of connection and dignity. But the price of doing right had never felt so devastatingly high. The next few days passed in a haze of job applications and growing anxiety. I called every restaurant in Manhattan, but the service industry was typically tough on older workers, especially those without glowing references from their previous employers. The bills kept coming. Rent, utilities, Sarah's school expenses, while our savings dwindled with alarming speed. I started accepting whatever work I could find. A day of catering here, a night of banquet service there, each job paying less and offering no security. The work was harder, the treatment worse, and the constant uncertainty was exhausting in ways that 15 years of steady employment had protected me from. I began to understand how quickly stability could disappear, how thin the line was between respectability and desperation. Sarah tried to hide her worry, but I caught her researching student loan options and part-time jobs, trying to figure out how to become financially independent more quickly. The guilt of forcing her into adult concerns, when she should have been focusing on her education, was another weight on my already heavy conscience. 3 weeks after my firing, I was serving at a wedding reception in Queens when I overheard something that changed everything again. 2 guests were discussing a scandal in Manhattan, something about a wealthy businessman whose treatment of his disabled son had been caught on video and gone viral on social media. My blood went cold as they described the incident. A restaurant scene where a father had humiliated his deaf son for entertainment, only to be shown up by a waitress who could actually communicate with the boy. The video, apparently taken by another diner, had been posted online with a caption about wealth without humanity, and it was spreading rapidly through social media channels. "The family's been completely exposed," one guest said to the other. "Turns out the kid's been fighting cancer too, which makes the father's behavior even more despicable. Their social circle is appalled. The man's business reputation is in tatters." "Good," the other replied. "Maybe next time he'll think twice about using his sick child as entertainment." I nearly dropped the tray I was carrying. The boy, the gentle, brave boy I'd connected with for just a few minutes, was fighting cancer on top of everything else. And somehow, some way, the truth about that evening had come to light. The family that had destroyed my life with their lies was facing consequences for their actions after all. But even as I felt a spark of vindication, I knew it was too late for me. My job was gone, my reputation damaged, my financial security destroyed. Whatever justice the video might bring to that family couldn't undo the weeks of struggle and uncertainty they'd caused us. Still, something had shifted in the universe's balance. The powerful couldn't always escape the consequences of their cruelty, and sometimes the truth found its way to light, despite wealth and influence. It was a small comfort in the midst of our ongoing crisis, but it was something. That night, I told Sarah about what I'd overheard. She immediately pulled out her laptop and found the video, which had indeed gone viral. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show the father's cruel setup, my respectful response in sign language, and the boy's obvious joy at finally being understood by someone. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of my actions and harshly critical of the family's behavior. People were praising my kindness while condemning the father's cruelty. Some commenters had even identified me as a local waitress, sharing stories of my professional service over the years. "Mom, look at this," Sarah said. Scrolling through hundreds of supportive comments, "People are calling you a hero. They're saying you showed that boy more love in 5 minutes than his own family had given him in years." It was gratifying to see public opinion vindicated my actions, but it also felt surreal. The same interaction that had cost me my job was being celebrated by strangers who understood what the family's wealth had initially hidden. The simple truth about cruelty and kindness, power and dignity. "There's more," Sarah said, clicking on another link. "Someone started a crowdfunding page for you. They're calling it Support Eleanor, the Waitress Who Chose Kindness. People are donating money to help you after losing your job for standing up for that boy." My eyes filled with tears as I read message after message from strangers who'd been touched by the story. Small donations were pouring in from around the country, $5 here, $20 there, each one accompanied by words of support and encouragement. Teachers, servers, parents, individuals with disabilities, and their families were all contributing what they could to help me through this crisis. The irony wasn't lost on me. The wealthy family whose complaint had cost me my job would probably never feel the financial impact of their cruelty. But ordinary people who understood struggle were rallying to support someone who'd lost everything for doing right. "We're going to be okay, Mom," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she continued reading. "Look at all these people who believe in you, who understand what you did was right. We're not alone in this." For the first time since that morning in David's office, I felt something like hope. Not because of the money, though every dollar would help, but because the truth had found its way into the world despite attempts to bury it. The boy I'd tried to help had inadvertently helped me in return, and the kindness I'd shown him was being returned by hundreds of strangers who recognized justice when they saw it. The crowdfunding campaign continued growing over the following days. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing disability advocates and sign language educators who praised my actions while criticizing the restaurant's decision to fire me. The contrast between public support and employer betrayal couldn't have been starker. David called me once, his voice tight with stress. The restaurant was receiving negative reviews and angry calls from people who'd seen the video. The corporate office was asking questions about their handling of the situation. The wealthy family whose complaint had seemed so important was now a liability rather than an asset. "Eleanor," he said, "I think there might have been some misunderstanding about what happened that night. Maybe we could discuss you coming back to work." I listened to his nervous backtracking with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. "David," I said finally, "when it mattered, you chose money over truth. When I needed support, you threw me away to protect profits. I don't think there's any misunderstanding about that." "The video changes things," he insisted. "People can see now that you were just being kind to that boy. The video doesn't change what happened. It just makes the truth impossible to ignore." I kept my voice level, professional. "You fired me for showing kindness to a sick child. That says everything about your values and nothing about my worth." I hung up without giving him a chance to respond. Whatever satisfaction I felt was tempered by the knowledge that his offer came from self-interest rather than genuine recognition of wrongdoing. If the video had never gone viral, my firing would have stood without question or consequence. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 days after David's call, I received a phone message that would change everything once more. A woman's voice, nervous but determined. "Miss Eleanor? My name is Patricia Hamilton. I'm the mother of the boy you met at the restaurant, the one you signed with. I saw the video and I need to talk to you. Could you please call me back? I have something important to tell you about what really happened that night." My hands shook as I played the message again. The mother, the woman who'd sat silently while her husband humiliated both her son and me, wanted to talk. After weeks of consequences and public shaming, she was finally reaching out. But whether this would bring closure or create new complications remained to be seen. Sarah was beside me when I returned the call, her hand on my shoulder for support. Patricia Hamilton answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Thank you for calling back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hadn't heard that night at the restaurant. I know I don't deserve your time after what we put you through, but I need you to know the truth about that evening." "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger and hurt I still carried. "My husband, Charles, can be cruel when he feels embarrassed or out of control. That night when you communicated with Tommy, that's our son's name, Charles felt humiliated because you could do something he'd never bothered to learn. You could talk to his own child in a way he couldn't." Her words came faster now, as if she'd been holding them back for weeks. "When we got home, Tommy was so happy. He kept signing about the nice waitress who saw him, really saw him. He said it was the first time in months that someone had treated him like a complete person instead of a problem to manage." Patricia's voice broke slightly. "That's when I realized how badly we'd failed him. How badly I'd failed him by staying silent." I waited for her to continue, not trusting my voice to remain steady. "The next morning, Charles called the restaurant in a rage. He said you'd been inappropriate, invasive, that you'd caused a scene. He demanded they fire you. I should have stopped him, but I was a coward. I let him destroy your life to protect his ego." The words came out in a rush of confession and guilt. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because Tommy made me promise. When the video went viral and we saw what people were saying about that night, he wrote me a letter. He said he couldn't live with knowing that his happiness had cost you everything. He said you were the kindest person he'd met in months of hospital visits and treatments, and that if we didn't make this right, he'd never forgive us." The image of that brave boy, sick and isolated, demanding justice for someone who'd shown him a moment of kindness, was almost too much to bear. Through his pain and struggle, he'd maintained a moral clarity his wealthy parents had lost somewhere in their pursuit of status and control. "There's more," Patricia continued. "I have recordings. Charles doesn't know, but I've been recording our conversations for months because of problems in our marriage. I have him admitting that he lied about what happened, that he was angry because you made him look foolish in front of his business partner." My breath caught. "You have proof that he lied to get me fired?" "Yes, and I'm willing to use it. I've already sent copies to the restaurant's corporate office and to several journalists who've been covering the story. Charles's business reputation is already destroyed, but I want to make sure you get justice too." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Patricia revealing the full extent of her family's dysfunction and her own complicity in it. Her son's cancer diagnosis had been kept private to avoid negative publicity for Charles's business ventures. Tommy's deafness had become another source of shame for a man who couldn't tolerate anything that reflected poorly on his image of perfection. But throughout it all, Tommy himself had maintained remarkable grace and strength. Despite his health battles and family struggles, he'd insisted on doing right by the waitress, who'd treated him with dignity when his own father had used him for entertainment. After hanging up, Sarah and I sat in stunned silence. The vindication was complete now, but it felt different than I'd expected. The wealthy family's cruelty hadn't been conquered by righteousness or justice. It had been undone by the moral courage of their own sick child, who'd refused to let my sacrifice go unacknowledged. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar, one of the journalists who'd been covering the story. "Ms. Eleanor, this is Jennifer Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. I just received some recordings that completely vindicate your actions and prove you were fired based on false information. We'd like to do a follow-up story, and there are some people who want to meet with you about employment opportunities. Would you be interested?" The opportunities that followed were surreal after weeks of struggle and rejection. 3 different restaurant groups reached out with management positions. A disability advocacy organization offered me a consulting role. The crowdfunding campaign had grown large enough to cover several months of expenses, giving me breathing room to choose wisely instead of desperately. But the offer that meant the most came from an unexpected source, a small cafe in Greenwich Village whose owner had seen the original video and been moved by it. She was deaf herself, and her establishment catered to the deaf and hard-of-hearing community. "We need someone who understands that communication comes in many forms," she explained during our interview. "Someone who knows that kindness doesn't cost extra but makes people feel valued. I think you could be that someone." The cafe was everything the fancy Manhattan restaurant wasn't. Warm instead of cold, welcoming instead of exclusionary, focused on bringing people together rather than maintaining artificial hierarchies. The pay was better than I'd expected, and the environment felt like home in ways my previous workplace never had. On my first day, I met customers who communicated in sign language, others who lip-read, some who used notebooks or phones to text their orders. The diversity of communication methods was beautiful, and my sign language skills, learned years ago for Sarah, were not just useful, but essential. More importantly, I felt valued in ways that went beyond mere employment. The cafe's regular customers quickly learned my story, and many shared their own experiences of feeling invisible or dismissed in mainstream establishments. We formed a community built on mutual respect and understanding. something I hadn't realized I'd been missing during my years of serving people who barely saw me as human. 3 months into my new job, I arrived for the morning shift to find someone unexpected waiting at a corner table. Tommy Hamilton sat quietly, looking healthier than when I'd last seen him, his hands moving slowly as he practiced signs. His mother sat across from him, watching him with the kind of attention I'd never seen her show that night at the restaurant. When he saw me, Tommy's face lit up with recognition and joy. He signed rapidly. "Eleanor, you're here. This place is amazing. Everyone can talk to me." I signed back. "How are you feeling? You look stronger." "Much better. The treatments are working, and Mom has been learning sign language. We have real conversations now." His gestures were more confident than I remembered, less hesitant and self-conscious. Patricia stood up as I approached their table, her face showing a mix of nervousness and hope. "I hope it's okay that we came. Tommy heard about your new job and wanted to see you. He's been talking about you constantly, about how you changed that terrible night into something meaningful for him." I looked between them, seeing the transformation that struggle and honesty had brought. Patricia's attention to her son was complete and respectful now. Tommy carried himself with more confidence, secure in his mother's love and his own worth. The family crisis that had begun with cruelty had somehow led them to genuine connection. "We're getting divorced," Patricia said quietly. Charles couldn't change, couldn't admit he was wrong about anything. But Tommy and I are building something better together. It's just the two of us now, and we're learning to really see each other. Tommy signed something to his mother, and she smiled, a genuine expression I'd never seen on her face before. "He wants to know if you're happy here, if this place treats you well." I signed directly to Tommy. "I'm very happy. This place feels like family, and I get to use my language skills to help people feel welcome. Your courage that night led me here. So thank you." His response brought tears to my eyes. "You showed me I was worth talking to. Now I'm showing Mom the same thing." They stayed for an hour, Tommy practicing his signing with me while Patricia watched and learned. Other customers joined our conversation, creating the kind of inclusive community atmosphere that made the cafe special. When they finally left, Patricia hugged me, awkwardly but sincerely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing my son when I was too proud to look at him properly. Thank you for being brave enough to do what was right, even when it cost you everything." As they walked away, I watched Tommy signing enthusiastically to his mother about something he'd seen on the street. She was watching his hands carefully, trying to follow along, occasionally asking him to repeat signs she hadn't mastered yet. The patient love between them was visible in their careful attention to each other's communication. The contrast with that awful night at the restaurant was complete. Then, Tommy had been isolated, even when surrounded by family wealth and social advantage. Now, despite his ongoing health challenges and their reduced financial circumstances post-divorce, he was genuinely connected to someone who loved him enough to learn his language and enter his world. 6 months later, I received an invitation that surprised me. Tommy was graduating from high school. Apparently, his health had improved enough for him to return to regular classes, and he wanted me to attend the ceremony. The invitation was handwritten in careful script, with his signature accompanied by the sign for friend. The graduation was held at a private school in Manhattan, and I felt terribly out of place among the wealthy families in their expensive clothes and practiced social interactions. But when Tommy crossed the stage to receive his diploma, he looked directly at me in the audience and signed, "Thank you." The gesture was small and quick, but several families nearby noticed and smiled at the obvious affection between us. At the reception afterward, Tommy introduced me to his teachers and friends as the woman who taught me I was worth listening to. His pride in our friendship was touching, but more importantly, I could see how much he'd grown in confidence and self-advocacy. He was signing openly now, requiring others to accommodate his communication needs rather than struggling to fit into their hearing world. Patricia found me before I left, looking more relaxed and genuine than I'd ever seen her. "Tommy's been accepted to Gallaudet University," she said, referring to the famous deaf university in Washington, D.C. "He's going to study education and wants to become a teacher for deaf children. He says he wants to help other kids feel as seen and valued as you made him feel that night." The circle was completing itself in a way I never could have imagined. That moment of simple kindness in a fancy restaurant had somehow set in motion changes that would ripple forward into generations of deaf children who would benefit from Tommy's teaching. The wealthy businessman who'd used his son as entertainment had inadvertently created a teacher who would spend his life defending children from exactly that kind of cruelty. As I rode the subway home that evening, I reflected on the strange path that had led from devastating job loss to meaningful connection. The family at table 12 had tried to destroy me to protect their own image, but in the end, their cruelty had revealed their character while my kindness had created lasting bonds that transcended social and economic differences. The fancy restaurant where I'd worked for 15 years had closed 6 months after my firing. The negative publicity, staff turnover, and loss of customers who'd learned about their treatment of me had made the business unsustainable. David had called once to apologize, admitting that firing me had been the beginning of the end for the establishment, but his apology felt hollow, motivated more by regret for business consequences than genuine understanding of the injustice he'd participated in. My new life at the cafe wasn't just about employment, it was about purpose. Every day I served customers who'd been marginalized or dismissed elsewhere, people who appreciated being seen and welcomed exactly as they were. The deaf community I'd become part of taught me about resilience, about communication that went far beyond words, about the strength that comes from refusing to be made invisible. Sarah had thrived during this transformation too, finding inspiration in watching her mother rebuild from devastating setback. Her medical school studies took on new meaning as she saw firsthand how health challenges intersected with social justice. She'd started volunteering at deaf advocacy organizations and was planning to specialize in working with hearing-impaired patients. "You know what I learned from watching you?" she told me one evening as we shared dinner in our small apartment. "I learned that doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from consequences, but it protects you from being someone you can't live with." That night at the restaurant, you could have walked away from that boy's pain to keep your job safe, but then you would have been a person who abandoned someone who needed help. Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. The choice that night hadn't really been between employment security and kindness. It had been between safety and integrity. And while integrity had cost me tremendously in the short term, it had ultimately led me to a life that was more authentic and meaningful than anything I'd had before. The wealthy family whose cruelty had started this entire journey was now scattered and diminished. Charles Hamilton's business empire had collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny and revealed character flaws. His social circle had abandoned him when his treatment of his disabled son became public knowledge. The investments and assets he'd built his identity around couldn't protect him from the consequences of fundamental cruelty. But Tommy and his mother had built something better from the ruins of that life. Their relationship, once damaged by wealth's corrupting influence, had been purified by struggle and honest communication. They discovered that love required attention, that connection demanded effort, and that true family bonds couldn't be purchased with money or status. 2 years after that fateful night at the restaurant, I received a letter that brought tears to my eyes. It was from Tommy, now thriving at Gallaudet University, written in careful English with occasional signs sketched in the margins. "Dear Eleanor," it began, "I wanted you to know that I'm student teaching at a deaf elementary school this semester, and every day I think about the lesson you taught me that night at the restaurant. You showed me that I deserved to be understood, that my language was beautiful, and that someone willing to see me was worth more than all the people who looked through me." The letter continued. "I tell my students about the waitress who learned sign language for her daughter, and then used it to bridge a gap for a lonely boy in a restaurant. I tell them that kindness doesn't require wealth or power, just willingness to see someone else as worthy of respect. Some of my students have parents who work in service industries, and they understand how important it is when someone with authority chooses compassion over convenience. He concluded, "My mom and I are driving up to New York next month for spring break. We'd love to visit your cafe and introduce you to some friends from school. You started something that night that's still growing. Still teaching people about the power of seeing others as complete human beings, deserving of dignity. Thank you for being brave enough to choose kindness when it would have been safer to look away." Reading Tommy's letter in the morning quiet of the cafe before we opened, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from understanding how seemingly small actions can create cascading positive change. That moment in the restaurant when I'd chosen to respond to cruelty with compassion hadn't just helped one isolated boy. It had set in motion events that would help countless others. The customers who frequented our cafe had become extended family, each bringing their own stories of overcoming invisibility and finding communities where they were valued. Elderly deaf patrons who'd spent decades being ignored suddenly found themselves at the center of conversations about art, politics, history, and philosophy. Young, hearing-impaired customers discovered a place where their communication preferences were honored rather than merely tolerated. But beyond creating community for others, my experience had fundamentally changed how I understood my own worth and power. For 15 years at the upscale restaurant, I defined myself through service to others, measuring my value by how well I anticipated wealthy customers' needs while remaining invisible myself. The firing had initially felt like confirmation that I'd been dispensable all along. Instead, it had revealed that my willingness to see others, really see them, was a rare and powerful gift. The sign language I'd learned for Sarah had become a bridge to connection with people who were hungry for exactly that kind of recognition. The empathy developed through years of serving dismissive customers had trained me to recognize pain and respond with dignity rather than defensiveness. Now, when young servers at other establishments complained about rude customers or mentioned feeling invisible and undervalued, I shared my story as encouragement. Not because standing up for others would always lead to positive outcomes, but because the alternative, becoming someone who could ignore suffering to protect personal safety, was a kind of death that no job security could justify. The crowdfunding campaign that had supported us during the transition had done more than provide financial assistance. It had connected us to a network of people who understood that service work was real work, deserving of respect, that kindness required courage, and that society's most vulnerable members deserved protection from those who would exploit or humiliate them for entertainment. Some donors had become regular customers at the cafe, drawn by the story but staying because of the authentic community we'd created. Others sent occasional messages sharing their own experiences of choosing compassion over convenience, of standing up for marginalized people despite potential consequences. The ripple effects of that night continued expanding, touching lives I'd probably never know about. On quiet Sunday mornings when the cafe was closed and I had time to reflect, I often thought about the different paths that single evening could have taken. If I'd smiled politely at the wealthy father's cruel joke and ignored his son's isolation, I'd probably still be working at the upscale restaurant, collecting steady paychecks while slowly losing pieces of my soul to the grinding indifference of serving people who refused to see my humanity. Instead, I'd chosen a moment of connection that cost me everything I thought I needed and gave me everything I actually needed. The financial security I'd lost was largely rebuilt, but more importantly, I'd discovered work that felt like purpose rather than mere survival. The community I'd found valued communication, compassion, and mutual support in ways my previous environment never had. The morning Tommy and his friends visited, the cafe was full of signing conversations, laughter that didn't depend on spoken words, and the kind of inclusive atmosphere that makes everyone feel welcome regardless of how they communicate. Tommy had grown into a confident young man whose experience of overcoming family cruelty and social dismissal had prepared him to advocate for other vulnerable children. He introduced his Gallaudet friends to me with obvious pride. "This is Eleanor, the waitress I told you about, the one who saw me when my own family was using me as a joke." But there was no bitterness in his voice, just recognition that difficult experiences had led to growth and purpose for both of us. His friends were future teachers, social workers, and advocates who understood intimately the importance of creating spaces where difference was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. They shared stories of their own transformations from invisible to valued, from struggling to thriving, from isolated to connected. Each story reinforced the lesson that individual acts of recognition and respect can change entire life trajectories. As they prepared to leave, Tommy signed something that has stayed with me ever since. "You taught me that I wasn't broken that night. Now I spend every day teaching other kids the same thing. The mean things people say about us can't define us if we refuse to believe them." His mother, now fluent in sign language and clearly devoted to supporting her son's dreams, added, "You saved our family by refusing to participate in Charles's cruelty. Tommy and I learned to really see each other because you showed us what genuine respect looked like. We're better people because of your courage." The transformation in their relationship was remarkable to witness. Where once there had been disconnection and use of Tommy as entertainment, now there was genuine partnership and mutual respect. Patricia had learned not just her son's language, but his perspective, understanding finally what he needed to thrive, rather than merely requiring him to accommodate her limitations. 3 years after that pivotal night, I received news that brought the story full circle in the most unexpected way. The building that housed our beloved cafe was being sold, and the new owners wanted to triple our rent, effectively forcing us to close. The deaf community was devastated at the prospect of losing one of the few truly inclusive gathering places in the city. But Tommy, now graduating from college and beginning his teaching career, organized something unprecedented. Using social media and the deaf community networks he'd built during college, he launched a campaign to save the cafe that had become symbolically important to so many people who'd felt invisible elsewhere. The fundraising effort went viral, not because of celebrity endorsement or corporate sponsorship, but because Tommy's story of finding dignity and purpose after family rejection resonated with people who'd faced similar struggles. Deaf individuals, service workers, parents of disabled children, and advocates for social justice contributed both money and time to keep our community space alive. Within 6 months, we'd raised enough money to purchase the building outright, ensuring the cafe would remain a permanent refuge for people who needed to be seen and understood. Tommy's leadership had transformed a potential ending into a new beginning, creating lasting security for a place born from a moment of kindness between strangers. The purchase celebration was held on a Sunday evening, with the cafe filled beyond capacity with people whose lives had been touched by our story. Deaf customers signed their gratitude while hearing patrons applauded, creating a harmony that transcended language barriers. Tommy gave a speech in sign language that was simultaneously translated for hearing attendees. His words focused on the power of community to protect and nurture its most vulnerable members. "This place exists because one person chose kindness over safety," he signed, looking directly at me. "Eleanor didn't know that treating me with respect would change both our lives. But she did it anyway because it was right. Now we have to do the same for others. Choose compassion even when it's difficult. See people even when it's easier to look away." The evening concluded with something I'd never experienced in 15 years of restaurant work. Every person present took time to thank me personally, not for serving them, but for creating a space where they felt valued. The contrast with my former workplace, where customers barely acknowledged my existence, couldn't have been more complete. As I write this story now, 5 years have passed since that night at Table 12. The cafe has become a model for inclusive hospitality, training other establishments in disability accommodation and dignity-centered service. Tommy, now a successful teacher, brings his students to visit regularly, showing them living proof that being different is a strength rather than a limitation. Sarah completed medical school and chose a residency program specifically focused on serving deaf and hard-of-hearing patients. She credits watching my transformation with teaching her that healthcare must address not just physical conditions, but the social isolation that often accompanies disability. Her work continues the circle of understanding that began with my learning sign language for her childhood needs. The wealthy businessman who started this entire journey through his cruelty remains largely irrelevant to our story now. His business empire never recovered from the damage to his reputation, but more importantly, his failure to grow from the experience left him isolated and bitter. His attempts to rebuild his image through charitable donations to disability organizations were rightfully viewed with skepticism by communities that understood the difference between performative giving and genuine change. But his son and former wife have thrived in ways that money could never purchase. Tommy's teaching has touched hundreds of children who might otherwise have grown up feeling broken or incomplete. Patricia's advocacy work focuses on helping other families navigate the challenges of disability with love rather than shame. Their relationship, forged through genuine communication and mutual respect, demonstrates that wealth without dignity is poverty, while dignity without wealth is still richness. The most profound change, however, has been in my own understanding of power and worth. For decades, I'd accepted that my value lay in serving others invisibly, that my worth was measured by how well I anticipated needs while remaining unnoticed. The devastating job loss had initially felt like confirmation of my disposability, but it had actually been liberation from a system that demanded my humanity as payment for economic survival. Now I serve others from choice rather than desperation, in an environment that values my full self, rather than requiring my invisibility. The customers I encounter each day see me as a complete person whose story matters, whose perspectives have value, whose presence enriches their experience rather than merely facilitating it. This mutual recognition creates the kind of authentic community that no amount of wealth can purchase, but anyone can choose to build. The letters I receive from people who've heard this story often ask the same question: whether I regret that moment of choosing kindness over safety, whether I wish I'd protected myself by staying silent. My answer is always the same. The person I would have become by ignoring that boy's pain would have been someone I couldn't live with being. Every difficult consequence that followed from standing up for Tommy was temporary. The job loss, the financial stress, the uncertainty about our future, all of that passed with time and effort. But the guilt I would have carried from participating in his humiliation through silence would have been permanent, a daily reminder that I'd chosen convenience over conscience when someone vulnerable needed an advocate. The lesson isn't that doing right always leads to immediate reward. It doesn't. Sometimes courage costs everything you think you need in order to discover what you actually need. Sometimes standing up for others requires falling down yourself, trusting that integrity provides its own foundation for rebuilding a better life. To those who find themselves serving others in positions where you feel invisible, undervalued, or dismissed, your humanity has worth independent of others' recognition. The kindness you show to vulnerable people matters even when, especially when, it goes unnoticed or unappreciated by those in power. Your willingness to see others fully is a gift the world desperately needs, and no employer's convenience justifies requiring you to withhold that gift. to families struggling with disability, difference, or any challenge that makes some members feel less valued. Communication is love made visible. Learning someone's language, understanding their needs, advocating for their dignity. These are the investments that create genuine wealth. The strongest families are built not on financial assets but on mutual respect and the courage to grow together through difficulty. To anyone who has witnessed cruelty and wondered whether speaking up is worth the risk, your voice matters precisely because using it requires courage. The people who need advocates most are often those least able to protect themselves. Your willingness to interrupt injustice, even in small moments, can change someone's entire understanding of their own worth. The restaurant industry, like many service sectors, often treats workers as interchangeable and disposable, while demanding emotional labor that goes far beyond job descriptions. But within that system, moments arise where we can choose to be fully human rather than merely functional. Those moments of authentic connection, server to customer, person to person, remind everyone involved that dignity is not determined by economic position. As I finish sharing this story, I want you to know that the boy whose pain started this journey is now a man whose purpose flows from that early experience of being seen and valued. The wealth his family possessed couldn't give him what a moment of respectful communication provided. The status they prioritized couldn't compare to the dignity he discovered through genuine connection. Tommy teaches children who face the same isolation and dismissal he once experienced. Every day he creates moments of recognition and respect that change how young people understand their own possibilities. The ripple effects of that single evening continue expanding, touching lives in ways we'll probably never fully know but can trust, are making the world more welcoming for people who've been made to feel invisible. Our small cafe continues serving as proof that businesses can prioritize humanity while remaining financially sustainable. Every customer who experiences genuine welcome there carries that expectation into other establishments, gradually changing industry standards through consumer demand for authentic respect. The community we've built around shared values continues growing, creating networks of mutual support that extend far beyond our physical location. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you witnessed someone being treated cruelly or dismissively? Have you felt the tension between personal safety and moral courage when someone vulnerable needed an advocate? Tell me about it in the comments. Your story matters, and others need to hear that they're not alone in facing these difficult choices. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need the reminder that their humanity has value regardless of how others treat them. Leave a like and subscribe to help this message reach another person who serves with heart and soul. Someone who might need encouragement to trust their instincts about right and wrong, even when doing right feels dangerous. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special podcast filled with stories just as moving as this one. You can find it here by clicking on the left. These are stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, of small acts of kindness, creating large changes, of dignity discovered in unexpected places. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the heart. Thank you for believing that service work is real work deserving of respect, that communication comes in many forms all worthy of attention, that everyone, especially those society makes invisible, deserves to be seen as fully human. In a world that often prioritizes wealth over worth, power over compassion, and convenience over courage, your willingness to choose differently matters more than you know. The person you choose to be in moments when no one important is watching shapes not just your own character, but the character of the world we're all creating together. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore another journey of ordinary people, discovering that their capacity for love, courage, and dignity is far greater than any obstacles they might face. Until then, remember, you matter. Your kindness matters, and your willingness to see others fully is a gift the world desperately needs.